Hi friends, welcome to my channel. My name's Kat and I'm a huge sci-fi and fantasy reader. So today we're going to be doing a video I've been wanting to do for so many months now, and I'm finally ready. And yeah, this is just kind of insane, and I'm sure you're going to think it, but I read 72 books from a Goodreads list, and today I'm going to be talking over them. So I saw this list come out, I think it was early last fall, of 72 best sci-fi books that have come out within the past 3 years, and me immediately I was like, okay, cool, I want to read all of these. And then I devoted the next 6 months or so to doing this. So I'm not going to be talking about every single book that I read because we'll be here for hours. That won't be interesting to anyone. But instead, I'm going to be talking probably about 30 books or so, broken down into 3 main categories. So these are going to be books to avoid at all costs, aka books that I really didn't like, I wouldn't recommend to anyone. Books that I loved and that are now some of my absolute favorite reads that I've done. And also books that I liked a lot but didn't quite love, but I would also recommend to a wide array of people. So let's start off with saying, just looking at this list, yes, I did read the majority of them, but I did not read all 72 books by any means. There were quite a few DNFs, which I'm not really going to get into, but there were some that just, I couldn't find myself interested in them, or I just wasn't the time for me. And then there were a few books too that I just decided not to bother to pick up because I wasn't interested and I had a feeling that I wouldn't enjoy them if I did read them. So after that, I probably read 65-ish, which still a considerable amount of books, and there were definitely some major wins and some major losses. So with that being said, let's get into the absolute worst of the worst. I'm going to try to be fairly positive with these books and not trash them because that makes me feel terrible. And also, I only picked out 6 because I didn't want to, even if I didn't really enjoy a book, I figured I'd rather just not talk about it instead of bashing it. But these are the ones that either deeply disappointed me or I absolutely hated the reading experience. The very first one that we're going to talk about is Winterworld by A.G. Riddle. I did talk about this one previously in my worst books of the first quarter of this year. And yeah, this was really, really disappointing. So we're following this world where there seems to be some kind of space interference, some kind of thing going, space interference, maybe some kind of alien attack that is leading to a rapid cooling of the world. So the world is very rapidly becoming unlivable aside from select points along the equator, and all of humanity is having to find themselves displaced along this. That in itself, I think, would have been an incredibly fascinating story, but instead this book ended up being a space exploration story as a group of renowned scientists go into space to try and figure out what this event is that's causing the rapid cooling. That in itself, again, could have been okay. It just really was not the book that I was anticipating or hoping for either. I really, really love this idea of we're following a rapid cooling event and possibly entering a new ice age. I love that. I would love to see the repercussions of all of these people living it and how they find ways to live, and what does the planet look like now? What does it mean for the average person to be alive? That, I think, would have been a fantastic novel, but instead we just get very long voyages through space where nothing feels like it happens. The writing, the dialogue between characters was so uninteresting and so uninspired. There was a love story that do not believe in the slightest. There's absolutely nothing to make me think that they actually cared for each other aside from the fact that we were told it. And overall, this one was just deeply, deeply disappointing, and it could have been so much better, I think. And I feel like a recurring theme for this is just going to be books that could have been better, but I think failed spectacularly. So keeping with that, the next book we're going to talk about is The Farm by Joanna Ramos. So it could have been, I believe, a really cool dystopian or utopian kind of book in which we really get into this idea of birthing rights and gender politics, but we're basically just in a modern world where rich women are able to hire out these usually poor immigrants who don't have many other options in life to be able to carry designer babies for them and they move to this facility called the farm. And from there, they're raised. They spend their pregnancy in the absolute luxury. They basically just like are given every single opportunity for this child to be in the best possible environment to be in while the surrogate is pregnant. And nothing came from this book. It, I think, could have been really interesting if we dived into a bit more of like dystopian kind of area with it, but it really ended up just being one woman living through this experience at the farm and then her personal difficulty afterwards with giving up the surrogate baby and perhaps not feeling very comfortable with what is happening when she really is able to advocate for herself and realize what's happening. She's no longer quite comfortable with this idea of being paid tens of thousands of dollars to deliver someone else's baby. So it was disappointing. It didn't really get into any interesting topics. There weren't any interesting discussions, and it just ended up being very flat, and yeah, nothing seemed to come from it. So The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. I don't think I can even say that much about this one because I skimmed it terribly. There were 3 POVs and I only enjoyed one of them, so all of the other ones I just kind of like quickly passed through because I wanted to get back to it. So in this world, we're following a future world where there's like Earth, there's the Moon, there's Mars, like there's all these different planets that are colonized, and they all have their own set of beliefs, own governments, own way of living. And we're following First Sister. She's unnamed. This is just her title. She's part of this religious sect of women who travel on long space trips with groups of armies and are there for confession and comfort. And it was incredibly interesting to read her perspective and to see what this world is like for these First Sisters who they're really there to comfort men in whatever capacity that so entails. And they have no agency. Their names are taken from them. The ability to speak is removed from them. They have absolutely nothing to their lives aside from following these very strict rules that are in place. And I thought her POV and her life and all of these experiences that she was going through were so interesting, because part of it, she's starting to realize that she does in fact want this agency and she wants to be able to dictate how her life is going to go. She would like to no longer be part of this religious sect, but she's never given that opportunity. She can't communicate with anyone. She can't tell them what she wants. And from there, she starts to follow like, is there a way I can get out? What can I do? And I thought that part was incredibly interesting. But the other POVs were following a soldier who's trying to take down this regime, and I just didn't find him interesting. I didn't like his voice. I didn't really like hearing his adventure. And unfortunately, that really ruined the book for me. So the next one, I am so confused about everything that happened in it. And it is Hummingbird, Salamander by Jeff Vandermeer. This, I would say, one of the stupidest books I've ever read. I truly do not understand any of the characters' motivations or anything that happened. And it just felt like such a pointless, ridiculous story for no reason. So we're following a woman who is a security specialist, and she is gifted this item. I can't remember if it's the hummingbird salamander thing, or I can't remember specifically what it is, but she's gifted this item from a human rights advocate and who recently had passed away. They didn't know each other, but she was somehow gifted this, somehow sent on this adventure to track down these items, and really dives into this deep government conspiracy. But I don't remember much more past that because it was incredibly uninteresting, and all I remember is that the main character was just going on these long adventures that felt pointless. She was going to try and track down this information about these animals, and again felt pointless. I didn't understand why she instantly became so obsessed with following this search that was given to her. And yeah, it's been so long that I can't remember much of what happened, but I really thought that it was terrible and it was incredibly boring. So I love the idea of sci-fi horror. In theory, it always seems like it's going to be something incredibly fascinating, but without fail, every single time that I've read a sci-fi horror or really tried to get into one, it's always disappointed me. And this was no difference with Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This one had so much potential, and again, it just did not work for me. So we're following the crew of this spaceship on a mission, and they get a distress call and stumble along the wreckage of this like luxury explorer, like think Titanic-esque ship that's been missing for like dozens of years at this point. And so they decide of course, that they're going to try and see what happened to this wreckage because they'll be able to get renown for having found it and being able to bring back this discovery to real life. From there, they enter the ship and just weird shit starts happening, like really creepy, like just think locked in a small space where it feels like maybe you aren't alone or something else is happening. And it started out pretty creepy. I did think that those vibes were starting to be very good that way, but then it just didn't quite go anywhere. It didn't quite follow through with what I was hoping it would be. It ended up just being quite boring again, and I didn't think that this ended up being that great. It ended up again just being boring to me. I didn't really find the ending that interesting, and yeah, just this exploration of the abandoned ship ended up not going quite as far as I hoped it would. So this brings us to the very last book that I'm going to talk about in this worst of section, and that is Blue Ticket by Sophie McIntosh. This is another one that I discussed in my worst books of Q1 of 2023. It had the beginning of some comments on gender politics that I think could have been interesting and reproductive rights. Like, it started off some conversations, but then never actually followed through with any of them and never really gave us like an interesting conclusion to what we were talking about. So we're in this dystopian world where when girls are 12 years old, they are brought to a facility and given either randomly either a blue ticket or a white ticket. So a white ticket means that you are going to be a mother. This will be your life. This is who you are now. Blue ticket, you cannot have children. Your entire life is going to be as a worker. So we're following a young girl who is given a blue ticket, and again, this dictates her life and she becomes a worker, and we're following her throughout her life as she realizes that having a family is what she actually wants, and is very upset obviously at the fact that this decision was taken away from her. So what I think disappointed me the most about this one is I feel like it would have been really great to know more about this world and why this decision is being imposed on women. Why we didn't really get anything else towards it. Like, it would have been fantastic if we knew, like, I don't know, is this because of low birth rates or overpopulation? Is it a very misogynistic regime who wants to force like reproductive rights onto women? Or what is causing it? We didn't get any of that information, and just me, to be really immersed in a world, I find that I really need to know exactly what's causing this dystopian world. Like, I don't know. That's just one of those details that really took me out of it. And otherwise, I also just didn't enjoy the writing. I didn't find it great. I didn't find it that interesting, and it was really, really hard to get invested in this book. Okay, I hope that wasn't too bad, because now we are getting on to the most fun category, which is books that I loved and I now would probably consider to be like within my best sci-fi I've ever read type of books. So I forced myself to only pick 10 here. There's definitely more that I loved, and I'm probably going to be talking about them in the next section, which are just books that I really liked but I couldn't quite put into my all-time favorites. But these are ones that all of them 5 stars. I loved all of them, was like ridiculously obsessed with them, still think about them, and yeah, like every one of them so fantastic. This is what like the best of sci-fi is. And I'm gonna just preface this by saying these are not for everyone. There's a lot of these that I know do not have like necessarily the most wide appeal, and some of them are just things that like really worked for me and I could see not working for a wide array of people because they either are like such like niche topics or maybe just like really intense subjects, which, you know, that's not for everyone. It is for me though, so be prepared to see my absolute favorites. So number one that I'm going to be talking about, and again, these are no order for least favorite to favorite, but number one that I'm talking about is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I read this a few years ago, so I don't necessarily have the biggest recollection in my mind for it, but we are following an AI doll who was created to be a companion for children. So the book is from her point of view as she lives this life as beginning in a toy store and just sits there and waits for children every day to see like, oh, is today going to be the day that I'm selected and I get to go home with someone? She just sits there hopeful every day until she's finally selected by a child to go home to the family with them. And we're following her just through this like eyes of wonder as she's experiencing all of these things, all of humanity for the first time, and really realizing what the world is about and trying to understand humans and their motivations. And I thought it was so beautiful and so incredibly sad. It really like made me feel a ridiculous amount, and was really just like one of the most beautiful depictions of humanity at its best and its worst that I've really ever seen. Just seeing everything through the eyes of Clara, like really, I don't know, it brought out like an eye of hope onto the world, but also at the same time just her not understanding some of these terrible things just like hurt so bad. And yeah, it was just like heartbreakingly beautiful. And really, I read this I think it came out in 2020, and I read it that year and really would have said it was like probably my favorite book of that year. This one might not be for everyone because it is really just inside the mind of this AI doll and her thoughts on humanity. So there's not a lot of action. There's not like a huge plot. It's just very character driven and very, yeah, just like this view of the world. So number 2 that I'll be talking about is Recursion by Blake Crouch. I read this like 3 years ago, and I have not been able to get it out of my mind. Like there are certain scenes in this one that fucked me up beyond belief, and I'm never going to be able to stop thinking about them. But we're following this world where this like weird sickness seems to be going around where people are suddenly remembering these entire like past lives. So it's like a ghost life. They have their current life, but they suddenly remember like this entire other life that they lived, like down to the details of like who they were married to, these children who no longer exist, and they just can't help but remember every single detail of this incredibly vivid life. So we follow a police officer who starts to investigate this, and it comes to light that there has in fact been this agency who's created time travel. But when you do this and you go back in the past and you change your life, it doesn't fully erase the past that you had, the original life that you had lived. So when you go back, you say you went back 6 years, you lived through these 6 years, but at that moment when you originally came back, suddenly the lives of everybody who had been impacted by you changing the past, they suddenly remember this entire other life that they had originally lived. And it's creating this like huge, intense, like chaos in the world because people now, they can't understand what's their real life. Why are they remembering all of these people who don't exist? Why are they remembering like a whole other life? And we follow like this detective and a scientist as they are going back in time further and further to try and stop the creation of this time machine, because they realize that the effects that it is giving are really out of control, and it is direly affecting the world to the point where it's going to become unlivable very quickly for the entire population. It was so beautiful. It was intense. It was deeply disturbing at times, but I wouldn't say that's a con to it. It just like made me even more engrossed because yeah, it's been 3 years and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. And it is by far my favorite book by Blake Crouch. It is 100% the one that I would recommend to everyone. Like, it is so good. So the next one is A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. This is a deeply political sci-fi book following like all of this one huge empire and all of these other planets or stations who are not part of it, but they are trying to keep like stay on good terms with them just so that they are not destroyed. We're following a diplomat from one of these small stations on the outskirts of the empire. They're not quite a part of it, but they do work closely with them, who has recently been appointed as a diplomat after the previous one died under mysterious circumstances. So we're following her as she goes to the heart of the empire and tries to figure out why this previous person died, as well as trying to figure out all of these mysteries of court life, because it is vastly different than anything she's ever witnessed before. This is very intense. It's like a very intense learning curve, I'd say, in this one, because the world that our character is going into is deeply different from our own, just in the sense of like all of the naming convention is very different, and it took me quite a while to wrap my head around that. The society itself is very different. They have a very lyrical and intense way of speaking, and that kind of I could find that a bit jarring at times, but overall the story was just so ridiculously good. And once you get past that like initial like, oh my god, what am I reading, I'm never gonna understand this moment, it just like all clicks beautifully in your head, and just really that appreciation for the author and how they were able to craft a world that's so interesting, so different from ours. Like I never stopped myself from appreciating just how truly brilliant somebody has to be able to craft a world so intricate and so unique. So yeah, that one, fantastic. To Be Taught of Fortunate by Becky Chambers is actually the first book that I read by her, and I can say it like has 100% made me a huge fan of hers because, again, it's probably one of the best books I've ever read in my life. So we're following a group of scientists who are on a exploration mission and going throughout various different planets to see if any of them, just to examine them and study what the world is like. It was deeply fascinating. Like, there were so many cool parts about the scientists would be in like stasis between planets, and the ship would conduct like a review of the planets that they're coming up to and what the atmosphere is like and what the conditions of the planet is. And while they're in stasis, their bodies would be slightly modified to like anticipate and react to this world a bit better. Like ones where the gravity is a bit stronger, they'd be made a bit like stockier, a bit more muscular. If it's a world that maybe they need a bit more oxygen, their lungs would be modified for that. I thought it was so cool. It was just like a beautiful exploration of the world and just this, like, them really appreciating what they find out there. And I don't really want to go into too many details because it's such a short book, but I would, if none other, I think this is the one that I would recommend the most. So The End of Men by Christina Sweeney Hart came out in 2021, I believe, which still, again, during the pandemic. And I believe that might have been at a detriment to this book, but at the same time, I think when I read it, it made it even more impactful. So we're following a world where there is a plague that comes out that specifically only impacts men. So women are completely immune, but men, when they catch it, there's like a 90% fatality and they die within a few days. So it was this deeply emotional book about some of these women who are involved in either the care of the pandemic, recording it, or the research, and just how deeply horrifying it is to see all of their family members die, but then them having to find a way to continue on. And also, one thing that I found the most interesting was a lot of this was taking a look at society and realizing, like, what if men were gone? How would certain things have to be restructured? Like, if you look at, for example, the trades, they are male-dominated fields. So they really had to restructure the way a lot of things are advertised to women so that more women will join these, as well as like even the safety equipment that a lot of, say, these tradesmen or like police officers used is very geared towards the male body, but now that there were only women, it actually would be more gender neutral. So I thought that was incredibly interesting. I love seeing books like this where either some event happens or some type of technology comes in and then we see how the world around it is impacted. Incredibly fascinating, and would highly recommend it because it was deeply emotional. It was just very interesting and really created a lot of things to think about as well. It feels weird to include something on the best of list that's maybe 100 pages long, but here we are. So this is The Test by Sylvain Neuvel, and it is just a super short novella following this man in a not so distant future who is trying to gain citizenship to the UK. And in this world, there's this really intense and we could say invasive type of citizenship that has to be gone through, that these people have to go through, that really assesses who a person is. I'm not going to say any more about it because this is definitely something that should not have a lot spoiled for it, but just know I thought it was incredibly good. It was so fascinating. It was heart-wrenching, and it made me feel a lot. Now on to one of the 2 books that I actually own. I definitely need to buy some of the others on this list, and I'm just taking my time with it. But The Vanish Birds by Simon Jimenez. Again, like, I don't really necessarily know how to describe this one because so many things happened. And I feel almost like every chapter in this book felt like a different short story. And like, even I read the first chapter of this book, and that alone could have been the best short story I ever read in my life. And that's just following a lot of these chapters, or you're following one person through the entire course of their life. And it's intensely beautiful and intensely interesting because the sci-fi concepts that take place in here are just so unique and so imaginative. Yeah, and like, I don't even know what to say, but at the heart of the story, we are following a ship crew, and they come across this boy who cannot speak, and they decide to rescue him and take him traveling with them. And from there, just so many things happen. There's so many repercussions to this. There's so many like mysteries around who this boy is and why he won't speak to them, why he was randomly like found on this planet that he is not from, and just this huge adventure and mystery that, oh my god, was just heart-wrenching. Yeah, I don't want to say any more about it because I think that this one's better to go in again knowing nothing, because so much happens and so much of it doesn't necessarily feel like central to the plot itself, but it made up for such a beautiful and imaginative story. Girl One by Sarah Flannery Murphy. This is another one that I read a few years ago, so my memory might be a little spotty on it, but we are following a girl who has been cloned, and she was born into this group of women who were basically this group of women who all went off to live together, and it is reported that they all asexually reproduced and all came out with women who are daughters who are copies of themselves. The main character, her mother has recently passed away, and it looks like perhaps it wasn't an accident, like perhaps she was murdered. And as she decides she wants to find out more about her past and how she actually came to be, it comes to light that the other women who were cloned and their mothers, they might all be starting to disappear as well, or somebody seems to be after them. So we're just on this like adventure as they all start to reconnect and try to figure out more about themselves. I don't necessarily know what really made me love this book so much. I think it was just very interesting concepts. I like the characters a lot. I love the adventure they went on, and it just felt like a very, very fun story. Okay, and what I actually think, now that I think back on it, is probably the best sci-fi book I've read within the last 5 years or so, and that is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This is a series of interconnected short stories where we are following the release of a plague on the world and basically everything that continues on with that. So there are stories that happen like immediately afterwards, dozens, hundreds of years into the future, of what this plague has done to the world and the impact it has on society to come. I thought that this had some of the most like interesting and unique sci-fi concepts I've ever read. Some of these, not all of the stories were amazing. Some of them didn't necessarily resonate as well with me, but overall, like, I just can't help but appreciate how truly innovative a lot of these stories were, and really sci-fi concepts that you never would have thought of. Like, there's one about like robot pets, there's space travel, there's talking pigs, there's black holes, like so many weird things that just were truly fascinating, and yeah, led to some of the most like creative stories I've ever read, and also one of the most like heart-wrenching, horrifying stories I've also ever read, which, if you know, I think it's the second one in there. Like, oh, my mind hurts, or my heart hurts just thinking about how truly intensely sad that was. And yeah, that's one that I want so many more people to read, so please read it. I think that it was truly one of the best sci-fi stories I've ever read. Okay, and friends, we are down to the final section. Thank you for bearing with me for all of this, but these are going to be 9 books that I liked a lot, I really deeply enjoyed, but I can't quite put them at that top tier. They're ones that I would recommend to a broad range of people, and I think that these are the ones that maybe are the most like accessible, as in I think most people would enjoy them. So first book to talk about, it's the only other one I own, but it is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So in this, we're following a scientist who has discovered that there's some type of particle that's starting to block out the sun, and it's causing, and what seems to be causing, a cooling of the world, potentially to a devastating level. He becomes part of this group who goes out to try and investigate what these items are and what these particles are, and to try and find a solution to help save the world. And it's great. It's really fun. It's really entertaining. There's a friend who he has in this one that's fantastic. I won't say any more, but I think that this is just like a very solid, good time. It is incredibly similar to The Martian. I find the character basically has the exact same voice, and that's like my only real criticism of it. But otherwise, it was like very fun. The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. We are following this group of students start to fall into this mysterious sleeping sickness. And it starts to spread throughout the town, where people just suddenly like fall asleep and are unable to be woken up. And we're just following like the town as they're dealing with this, and people are trying to figure out like what causes it and what the cure could be. I thought it was just like a very decent like pandemic almost story. It would only it was very localized to this one town, but it was just very interesting. Again, seeing how people dealt with it, and it felt relatively low stakes, but it was still very interesting. A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. I'm not going to get too much into this one because it is only about 200 pages, but we're following a world where robots and like, I guess AI had previously existed, but at one point they all decided that they no longer wanted to be part of the world and all went out into the wilderness, just leaving the world behind. So we're following a tea monk who goes from town to town, just sitting with people and listening to their problems. And they go out into woods just exploring and come across a robot, and from there it's just like a lot of really sweet talks about humanity and trying to explain to the robot like why humanity does certain things, why they feel certain ways, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was like really heartwarming and really sweet. The Wanderers by Chuck Wendig. This was weird and a crazy amount happened. Initially, the book starts off as you're following this like horde of sleepwalkers who are slowly going throughout the country. Like it starts with one person and then multiple others come in, and we're just following this horde as they go across the country, slowly gathering more people. And all of these people, like they call them the flock, who are following along with them. So family members, loved ones who see their family, like see these people just start wandering off and they are completely unable to be contacted. Like they are just walking asleep. And we're following just a group of scientists and loved ones who are following them along and trying to figure out what happened. It does devolve into a story about a plague as well, just a mild spoiler, but it is one of the most intense and realistic type of plague stories I feel like I've seen, aside from this whole sleepwalker thing, but that was very interesting and again, like very, very intense in a lot of ways. The Passengers by John Mars felt kind of realistic to our world. So we're in this world, there are driverless cars, and they've really become like the norm within society. So a hacker group hacks the interface for several of these cars and takes, I believe it's 6 or 7 people into hostage who are stuck in their cars. And so which of these people are going to die and which ones do they think should be killed for their sins. All of them have some type of secret or some type of past where many things have happened, and they just and this slowly comes to light as their journey goes on and people are voting for who lives. It was super, super interesting, really fast paced, full of action, very like gripping, and yeah, just so interesting. And also felt like, I don't know, somewhat realistic in the sense that maybe one day driverless cars will be possible and maybe they will be able to be hacked. The Anomaly was weird, and I can't tell if I loved it or also can't 100% describe everything that happened or know if I understand everything that happened. We're following this one flight from Paris to New York that lands, but it turns out that this flight had actually landed 4 months before, and not just the flight number, but this entire roster of people, all of them, they had landed before, like 3 months before, and there are duplicates to all of these people who landed who are walking around. We're following the investigation of this, of trying to figure out what happened and how this came to be, of there being a duplicate flight and duplicate versions of people, and what does this mean? And it was really, really weird. It is one that I really think a lot of it went over my head, but it still was incredibly fascinating. I feel like I'm going very fast at the end now because I'm just trying to get through. Oh, the next one is Tell Me an Ending by Joe Harking. This is it really reminds me of a Black Mirror episode, but there is this technology in this world where people are able to have memories removed, and you're able to basically have this process so that you don't even know that you had the memory removed. So you have no knowledge whatsoever of anything that could have happened. But following the lawsuit, everybody who had their memory previously removed are sent a notice to advise them that they had undergone this procedure and they now had the option of restoring this memory. So we're just following a few people who are kind of like grappling with this decision of, should I get my memory restored if I don't know what it is? Like, would it, I obviously forgot it for a reason, but should I go back and let myself figure it out? And just this like intense curiosity of like, how much will it impact my life if I do remember what it is? It was pretty interesting, but I didn't feel like they went far enough into everything that could have been talked about. Like, I felt like a lot of the examples of what they discussed were pretty surface level. Like somebody chose to forget that they had an affair, and that's basically what it was. Like, I feel like it could have gone a lot more interesting, and yeah, that was like my biggest criticism of this one. And then the last one I'm going to talk about, yay, last one, is specifically for the Star Wars fans out there. I'm going to recommend Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. So this is a book that takes place early on in Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's relationship as Master and Apprentice, as they are completing a mission together and trying to figure out a way to work together, because they both have very different styles in life and very different attitudes towards the Jedi Council and the rules to follow and all of that. And it was really, really good. I would 100% recommend listening to it on audio, because it has like a full production in that there's sound effects, there's music. It's wonderful. And I think if you are interested in any way of getting into Star Wars books, this is definitely where I'd recommend getting started. So there you go. That is my review of these 72 books that I read from the Goodreads list. If you've read any of these, let me know. I'm probably going to be insane. There was another one of these lists of like the 72 best fantasy books, and yeah, just keep an eye out. There's probably going to be a video about that within the next few months. But if you like this, please subscribe, like the video, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one.